Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the scars on your face tell a brutal story. Now imagine those scars came from another member of your own species who literally chewed on your face while you were still alive, and yet you survived. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, doesn't it? But this is the reality paleontologists discovered when analyzing Tyrannosaur skulls. And believe me, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the extreme aggression found in the world of dinosaurs. What you are about to discover will completely change the way you view these creatures that dominated our planet for millions of years. You probably grew up watching movies where the Tyrannosaurus Rex is portrayed as the ultimate predator, right? But there are details about this creature that Hollywood never told you. Details that make this animal far more disturbing than any director has ever managed to capture on screen. Years ago, scientists found a T-Rex skull that became known as Stan. Yes, they gave a very common name to an extraordinary fossil. But what made Stan so special wasn't just his preservation, it was what was etched into his bones. When researchers examined the back of the skull, they found punctures. These weren't natural cracks or damage from the passage of time. They were precise holes that penetrated deep into the bone. Was Stan just an isolated case? Perhaps an unfortunate moment of violence between two males fighting over territory? Scientists thought the same thing, so they decided to dig deeper. What they discovered was shocking. Upon examining multiple Tyrannosaur skulls from different locations and time periods, researchers cataloged 324 facial bite wounds. 324! Let that number sink in for a second. We aren't talking about a few unlucky individuals. We are talking about a systematic pattern of facial violence between members of the same species. And these weren't playful nips. We are talking about bites from an animal whose jaws could exert over 3 tons of pressure. To give you an idea, that is enough force to crush a car door like it's paper. Now imagine that force being applied directly to your face while you are conscious and fighting to survive. Paleontologists even found these marks on toe bones. Think about that. Toes don't have much meat. They're basically bone covered by skin. The fact that there are bite marks there means that after eating all the meaty parts, these animals kept chewing, searching for any last scrap of edible tissue.
Your favorite movie dinosaur? The one you think is incredible and powerful. It ate members of its own species, and it did so regularly enough to leave fossil evidence that lasted millions of years. If you think the T-Rex's behavior is disturbing, wait until you learn what was happening in Madagascar during the Cretaceous period. Because on that isolated island, a dinosaur named Majungasaurus was writing an especially dark chapter in the history of prehistoric life. The Majungasaurus holds a very specific distinction in the world of paleontology. It was the first dinosaur where scientists were able to prove in an absolutely definitive way that cannibalism occurred. It wasn't a suspicion, it wasn't a hypothesis, it was scientific proof that would stand up to any scrutiny. How did they reach such a categorical conclusion? The process was meticulous and fascinating. First, they found Majungasaurus bones with bite marks. Up to that point, nothing extraordinary. Predators bite prey all the time. But then, scientists placed these bones under specialized microscopes and began to analyze every detail of the marks. What they saw was revealing. The marks had patterns of parallel scratches created by the serrated edges of the teeth. Each dinosaur tooth has a unique configuration, almost like a fingerprint. Researchers measured the spacing between these scratches, the depth of the marks, and the angle of penetration. Then came the crucial part. They took those measurements and compared them with every known predator that inhabited Madagascar during that period. They tested against every carnivorous species, every possible candidate that could have left those marks. And do you know the only animal whose teeth were a perfect match? The Majungasaurus itself. Now, you might be thinking that perhaps they were just scavenging carcasses they happened to find. Opportunistic scavengers, you know? But the environmental context tells a different story. Madagascar during the Cretaceous was not the tropical paradise we know today. It was practically a desert. Dry, hot, brutal. Water sources were rare, food was scarce. And here is the cruel truth about survival. When you are starving, when your survival instincts are screaming for nutrients, you stop being selective. It doesn't matter if that meat belonged to something with the same face as yours. It doesn't matter if you might have even been related. Food is food. The scientists who made this discovery were quick to point out that cannibalism is not as rare in nature as we think. It happens in dozens of modern species when conditions get tough. But there is something particularly disturbing about finding fossilized evidence of it, seeing, etched into bones that are millions of years old, proof that one creature methodically stripped the flesh from another member of its own species.
Madagascar wasn't just an island, it was a battlefield for survival, where the normal rules of animal behavior were suspended by the brutal necessity of staying alive. Sometimes, fossils tell stories so complete and detailed that they seem like tragic scripts already written. Few fossils tell a more depressing story than a particular specimen of Daspletosaurus discovered in Canada. This single animal experienced both systematic violence and post-mortem cannibalism. Its life was brutal, its death was lonely, and its body became a meal. Let's start with the skull. When paleontologists first examined it, it was immediately obvious that this dinosaur had suffered. The skull was covered in injuries, punctures at the back of the head, deep grooves on the face, pieces of bone completely missing, torn away by traumatic force. And here is the crucial detail. When they analyzed these wounds more carefully, the measurements showed they were caused by Daspletosaurus teeth. Another member of the same species had attacked this individual. But it wasn't just once, there were multiple attacks. How do we know there were multiple attacks? Because the bone shows different stages of healing. Some wounds were older, with bone tissue already starting to fill the holes. Others were more recent, with less evidence of regeneration. This means this dinosaur was repeatedly attacked throughout its life. It wasn't a single territorial fight gone wrong. It was a series of violent confrontations that this animal had to endure and survive. This pattern continued throughout the dinosaur's life, and then finally it died. Perhaps of old age, perhaps of disease, or perhaps from one last attack that finally went too far. You would think the story would end there, right? But no. Because when paleontologists examined the skull in even greater detail, they found a second set of bite marks, and these were completely different from the first ones. These were made after death. The post-mortem marks were larger, deeper, and more systematic. They were the kind of marks you see when something is methodically stripping meat from bones. Large punctures where teeth penetrated to get a better grip. Scratches where the jaw was dragged along the bone to scrape off the last bits of tissue. Whoever found that carcass was thorough. They bit both ends of some bones, a technique used to crack the bone open and access the nutritious marrow. Nothing was wasted. Every scrap of flesh, every fragment of nutrient was extracted from that body. Researchers have called this a unique record in paleontology, a single individual that experienced both intraspecific violence and post-mortem cannibalism. This dinosaur spent its entire life being bullied and attacked by other members of its own species, and when it finally died, those same neighbors showed up, not to pay their respects, but with napkins ready for a meal. There is a 9-ton block of sandstone in Utah that contains what might very well be the dumbest group death in the entire history of dinosaurs. Inside this block are at least 6 Utah raptor skeletons, adults, teenagers, juveniles, an entire family of giant raptors. And mixed in with them are the remains of whatever they were trying to eat when they all died. What likely happened is this. Some herbivore got stuck in what was essentially prehistoric quicksand. Trapped, helpless, an easy meal, right? A Utah raptor sees this and thinks it's hit the jackpot. It moves in to finish the job. Except the mud is stickier than expected. Now it's stuck too. It's struggling, trying to break free, but every movement only pulls it deeper. And then its family arrives. The family should have looked at the situation, recognized the danger, and maybe tried to find a branch or something, or just cut their losses and walked away. But no, instead, one by one, they apparently decided the best plan of action was to also jump into the death trap. The evidence suggests that as they sank, some were literally stepping on each other trying to escape. It wasn't a noble death where everyone held on together until the end. It was absolute panic, with each raptor trying to use its relatives as stepping stones to reach solid ground. None of them made it. They all sank, slowly and agonizingly, into the mud that would become their fossilized tomb. Now, here's the really embarrassing part. Utah raptors were massive. We're talking about raptors the size of polar bears. They had 8-inch claws on each foot, built with thick muscles designed to pounce on prey and hold them down. They could probably take down almost anything they wanted. And their weakness? Wet dirt. All that strength, all those natural weapons, defeated by basic physics and mud. This fossil block is still being studied, but it's already clear that it was a total disaster for everyone involved.
As we've seen, prehistory wasn't just a display of brute force. It was a landscape of extreme survival where morality had no place. What modern paleontology shows us is that dinosaurs were much more than movie monsters. They were complex animals living in a world where being devoured by a neighbor or suffering systematic attacks to your own face was just another day at the office. From opportunistic cannibals in Madagascar to organized gangs in Argentina, these discoveries prove we are still only scratching the surface of what really happened during the reign of these giants. With every fossil unearthed, the image of the terrible lizard gets a little darker and a lot more fascinating. If you'll never look at a T-Rex the same way again, don't forget to support our work. Like this video, it helps the algorithm understand that you enjoy detailed scientific content like this. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes about the most incredible and terrifying creatures to ever walk the earth. If you want a part 2 to this video, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.